Hey guys, I'm going to try to make this a quick one. Um, a lot of people have issues migrating content from one report server to another. Uh, you might know that the easiest way to migrate a report server is just to migrate the report server database, but there are times when that's not going to be possible. For example, going from SharePoint integrated to an SSRS or PBIRS native instance. You can't do that. Or if you want to change the database name, you're not allowed to change the database name once you've decided on a database name. Most of you will have the report server database name. You can't change it once you create it. You should not change it because you risk breaking your reporting server instance. There's a lot of little hard-coded values that reference the database name in stored procedures, triggers, that sort of thing. So, all right, let's get started. I'm not going to be looking at the camera very much. Apologize for that. To start off with, we want to grab the official RS migration script that Microsoft has published. You can get it off of GitHub. I've included a link in the blog article that I wrote. I'm just going to click this button right here to copy the contents. And then what you would do is you would just paste it into Notepad or your favorite text editor, just like that. And then just save the file just like that, SSRS migration.rss. I've actually already done that. I've got it right here on my desktop, but it's pretty much just what I did right there. Now, you don't need to use this PowerShell script that I'm providing. I just found that calling the executable the way the official documentation tells you to do, it's just so flippin' confusing. Let's go through these. I think I can. So here's an example, right, of what it would look like using the Microsoft executable, uh, just executing it directly without a middleman, I guess. It's hard to see what's what, like what is this or this, or what's the U, or what's the P, what's the V. So essentially what I did is create a wrapper script. It's just a script that envelops that command. I just included a whole bunch of comments, so it tells you what this is doing. The parameters are a little bit more descriptive. But in the end, it just calls the executable just as you would do without this script. It's just sort of parameter mapping and comments to help you figure out what's going on. It makes it a lot less confusing, at least to me. But if you don't mind, just referencing the documentation and having to look up what variable is what, or what parameter is what, then go for it. No, I mean, like one of the things that kind of confused me was like, why is this parameter in quotation marks and then this one isn't? I was just getting really confused. I just sort of copied all the syntax and I let this thing remember how to do it, the script. Okay, so now that we've gotten that out of the way, the other thing we're going to need is our rs.exe. That's going to be doing the work for us. And you already have that file, okay? You just have to find it. It depends in what implementation you have, but let's take a quick look. Because I think I include the path. I think this is the path if you're like running 2016 SSRS or earlier. I think it's going to be here. in your SQL Server installation folder under tools bin rs.exe. If you're using a newer version, like for my example right now, I'm going to be migrating to Power BI report server, and um, we can check. This is the path for that. So it's program files, Microsoft Power BI report server, shared tools /rs.exe. Consult your documentation if you can't find it, or just do a search for your Windows in your Windows in your C drive rather, or whatever drive you've installed RS in. So what I've done here is I've just pointed this variable RSEXE path to the RSEXE. I've done the same with the migration script. This is the migration script path. So I showed you guys the file that I had created. It's right here, and that's the path, right? I've just mapped it right here. And sorry, this is the source URL. So the source URL specifically refers to the web service URL. Okay, so it's going to be /report server. That's the default. It's whatever you've got here in this web service URL tab. And that's going to be, you're going to need one for the source and then one for the destination. So where you're migrating from and where you're migrating to. Okay, so for this example, I'm keeping things really, really simple. I'm going to be migrating from this report server to the same report server. I'm just going to essentially migrate one folder. I provided my credentials here. This is my real password. Don't worry, I'll change it. It's not exactly a very secure password. I created this user just for this example. This is the source folder and the destination folder. Now, an important thing to know, this is pretty important, and I've written it here in the comments. But I find that no matter how many capital letters I use or exclamation marks, it's kind of crazy. Some people will go through some of these articles that I've written, and something will go wrong, and it won't work. And ultimately, they always ignore something that was in bold. Please take your time to read through these notes. I didn't write them for fun. I didn't write them for myself. I already know how this works. This is for you. So just read it. So the destination folder where we're migrating to, important, this needs to exist already. The script is not going to create the parent folder that we're going to put everything in, nor will it overwrite anything. Keep that in mind. This script does not overwrite a single thing. It will not overwrite anything. The security parameter, it's up to you if you leave it on or not. It's really depends on your particular scenario. This basically means, do you want RS to migrate over whatever specific permissions were set to the items that you're migrating? If you're migrating from, like, say, SharePoint, I don't know how well that's going to work. I don't know if I haven't actually tested migrating the security settings. Like, will it know how to translate, make that translation? I think maybe it can, but things tend to break a lot more when SharePoint's involved. You'll see what I mean by that. I'll show you in my example. I've already done a little bit of troubleshooting ahead of time. I ran into issues getting this test ready, and I'll take you through the troubleshooting process that I went through to figure out what was going on. For that, I'm going to be using Fiddler. Fiddler is a great troubleshooting tool whenever you're dealing with anything web. We'll get to that in a bit. So just for now, because we're doing a RS to RS migration, that's really simple. It's really as I've got it here, put in the report server the service URL. I would have put a different one if I had a different server, but for this example, I'm just going to be doing one folder to one folder, keeping it really simple. I'm going to be moving things from the source folder. And let's take a look at that source folder now, actually. So it's this is quite a messy environment. I use it for a lot of testing, so I apologize. But here's my source folder, and this is actually kind of nice and clean. So I've got a data source folder and I've got a reports folder. The data source folder has one data source. I've got a connection string and some embedded credentials. Another point that is important to know. The script will not migrate any passwords. You will have to re-enter the password. It will look like it migrated the password, but I guarantee you it did not migrate the password. It won't. It'll have some asterisks there, but it didn't actually migrate it. So note that right now, this is working, right? It connects successfully. The password's in there and it works. Now, if I go back, we can look at the reports folder. I've only got one report in there. We can execute it and see that it does run. So great. So we're going to be migrating this folder and these folders as well to this other destination. It's called migration. It's just an empty folder called migration. I've created it because if I tell it to set the destination as the migration folder and it doesn't exist, it will fail, right? So it's got to exist already. With that, we're really ready to go executing the script. So you can see it's going from source to migration. That's the target. And we've omitted a couple of parameters here. That's because we're not dealing with SharePoint. So this is a native to native migration. Okay. So this is all on the blog, but I'm just going to kind of pan through it all just so you can see everything one more time. False, because I don't want to bring over the security settings. I want it to inherit from the destination folder. So if I set this to false, all the things that I migrate over to the new folder, they're all going to inherit the security settings of that destination folder, of the migration folder in this case. Okay. Okay. So now I've got this in PowerShell ISE right now. The reason for that is because it's really easy to edit a script in PowerShell ISE. However, if I were to execute this, it's going to make it, kind of impossible to proceed. I'll show you why. So it retrieves all the things that's going to migrate, lists them out and says, press enter to start. I can't press enter. I mean, it just, for whatever reason, it won't let me. So what I do is I just copy this over and open a normal PowerShell window. And I'm just going to paste it all in there. That's it. And so now I'm going to press enter. And what it's going to do is it's not going to do anything at first. So far, all it does is it lists out the schedules I've got, right? And anything else, it's going to migrate, right? So here's the folder, the data source folder, the reports folder, the basic report, RDL, and the RS database shared data source, right? If I had subscriptions, it would be doing that too. It also migrates subscriptions. And then it says, as a final confirmation, this is where we're going to, from and then to. And it asks me to hit enter if I want to start. This is where it will really start. Okay, so I'm going to hit enter again. There's going to be a couple of failures. That is A-OK. And I'll explain the failures in a second. So that's it. It's done already. The reason this is failing is because it tried to migrate the schedule. It gives a really bad error that doesn't really mean anything. Over here, it kind of tells you the real reason. Cannot insert duplicate key in object schedule. So the thing is, I'm doing a server to server migration. So I've already got this schedule. It's a shared schedule that it's trying to migrate. It already exists, right? So of course it fails. So not a problem. If it was a brand new server or it didn't have that schedule, it would have succeeded. Here you can see it migrated the folder uh, uh, and all that other stuff. It tells me I'm going to need to re-enter the password. And let's go ahead and see what that looks like. So I'm going to refresh this migration folder and our stuff should be in there now. Yep. Now, if I go into data source and check out this RS data source, you see it looks like there's a password there. But if I actually hit test connection, it fails. The reason is because it didn't transfer the password. This is actually essentially blank. So I'm going to go ahead and enter my password. I hit apply, and now the report that we migrated will work. So I go over to this report, and now I can execute it. That's it. From native to native, it's quite simple. There are a couple of hiccups that can occur. Those hiccups are what I've personally run into anyway. If there is too deep of a nest, if the hierarchy of the folders goes too deep, you can run into some issues. I've personally run into an issue where I was trying to migrate from one environment to the other, and for some reason, once it got to like the third level deep of folders, it got kind of confused, and it would try to copy a child item before it would try to create the parent folder for that item. And so because the parent folder did not exist yet, it would fail. So an example of what I just said would be, how we just migrated this folder. Sorry, let me go back to, sorry, I didn't mean to be executing the source report. I don't know if that's what I just did. It looks like maybe I did. Oh, no. Oh, never mind. It was the wrong tab. So this migration folder, we've got these folders we migrated, but imagine if it had attempted to migrate this data source file before it created this data source folder. So I've noticed that it does that when it's just too deep of a nest. I just honestly just kept running the script over and over again, and eventually it just copied everything over. So it wasn't really a big deal. I just had to keep running it over and over again. Through a lot of errors while it was doing that, but I mean, it worked. So that's one potential thing that you could run into. The other thing that you could, another thing you can run into, I think this is a lot more common, is connection issues. Like, what do you do if you try to run the script, but it can't connect? I mean, a prerequisite of running the script is wherever you're running it from needs to be able to access both servers, right? So you need to be able to visit this URL, this report server URL. If you pull this up in a browser and it doesn't load, it's never going to work. It needs to be able to load both the source and the destination. How do you figure out, how do you troubleshoot that if it doesn't connect? It's kind of hard to tell you ahead of time, but the things that I see the most happen are when HTTPS is involved. If maybe just make sure you're actually calling the right path. If your URL is HTTP, use HTTP. If it's HTTPS, use HTTPS. Because the RSEXC is kind of an older technology, I think it might not be using TLS 1.2 or greater by default. So if the target server has restrictions, it doesn't even matter if like it's trying to talk to itself, like RSEXE is on the server it's trying to talk to. It'll still fail if you have TLS 1.0 blocked, and it's attempting to make a connection with TLS 1.0. If you want to know more about that, there's a whole article I've got on TLS and how to, troubleshoot those issues. Those are honestly the most common things I've seen. I'm going to talk a little bit about migrating to SharePoint or from SharePoint. I don't know why you would ever be migrating to SharePoint because SharePoint and RS integrated is a deprecated technology. And I mean, I don't know of anyone that's migrating to SharePoint. It's or an RS integrated instance. It's people going from that to native. So that's what I'm going to be covering. But just to recap on what we've gone over so far, just remember the script isn't going to override anything. The folders have to exist beforehand, at least the parent level folder. And if there's deep nesting, you might have to run the script over and over again until it, one time basically for each layer, something like that. And then if you run into connection issues, or even if you run into crazy weird errors, I would recommend Fiddler, and Fiddler's mostly for the errors. And then if it's a straight up failure of a connection, if it loads in a web browser and it just doesn't work with RSEXE, my thought's going to be it's a TLS issue. You've got TLS 1.0 blocked, and the RSEXE is an old program. It's probably using TLS 1.0. There are ways to fix that. Just, again, look for that article. All right, let's move on to migrating from SharePoint environment to native. And this is going to be kind of tricky. So to start off with, I'm going to go ahead and delete the stuff that we migrated over to this migration folder. So I've deleted it, and now it's blank again. We can go ahead and start over. Okay. So bear with me. I've created this side application. If I try to go to this, it won't actually load anything. That's because the site collection, the sites I've created or site collections I've created, none of them are using the root path. So these are essentially the sites that I'm going to be wanting. This is the site I'm going to be targeting. I just created an extra one just so you could see what having more than one site looks like. So this is from my, I've got to manage site collections. So under web application, I've got that web application that I mentioned, and then this is the corresponding site that I'm going to target. So if we combine that, and we can go to the site, and I can show you what it looks like. This is a pretty slow instance, so just bear with me. Okay, so here is the folder I created a little bit ago. So reports folder. You can see I've got one report in here. It runs fine. It's the same report that we migrated from native. And I've actually got the data source folder in a different folder. It's in this data connections folder right there. So, okay. We're going to run into issues, just so you know. It's not going to go anywhere as well as it did with native to native. So just like before, we want to get that /report server URL. that we got with our native instance. Now, this is gonna essentially be your site URL, and then with this particular bit of path appended to it, it's underscore VTI underscore bin slash report server. And when I go here, you can see that all my site collections rather, for this, web application load. So this is the site that I'm going to want to transfer. And you can see here's the data connections folder, and there's my my data source. And then here's the reports folder, and there's my report. Okay. So, oh, sorry. Another thing I forgot to mention that's quite important is whatever account you're using obviously needs to have access to all these things. I mean, I would think that that's obvious, but you'd be surprised. So the user that you're using to do this transfer needs to have access to all these reports. A little bit easier to do when you're dealing with native, again, because you just, if the user is a local admin, it overrides all the object security and they have access to everything. A lot of times when you break inheritance, security inheritance, a user can block home level administrators from seeing an item. They're maybe you're an admin in the home folder, but this user just broke inheritance on his folder and removed those administrators from the folder, and now you can't see his folder unless you're a local admin. So something to keep in mind when you're transferring stuff. You want to use an account that has high enough permissions, and that gets a little more complicated with SharePoint because now you need access to this SharePoint site and these different items and all sorts of stuff. So that's up to you to figure out. But I've already given myself on this account permissions on both environments. Okay, so let's go ahead and try this out. So you grab this site URL, and that is going to be your source URL. I've got it right here. My destination URL has not changed. It's still the native server. And then what is changing is going to have to change is this this folder business. So normally, if you want to transfer the root folder, you just leave a slash, and it's going to transfer everything in there. This isn't going to work, and I'm going to show you why and how I figured it out. Also, we need to add an additional parameter. We don't need this one, the destination SharePoint site, but we do need this source SharePoint site, and I'm going to be adding it over here. So this back quote just means continue on next line. So I'm going to do a back quote, press enter, and if this back quote wasn't here, it would not read this next line. So back quote, and then the command continues on the next line, and you can see -v st equals, and this is the site, the specific SharePoint site that we're using for the source. So the SharePoint site, I'm doing sites BI, right? Because that is the site. Didn't work when I tried the full path. I had to sort of investigate using Fiddler to see what was going on, and I saw that the way it was forming the URLs, it was clear that I wasn't supposed to include this in that parameter because it was essentially putting in the same thing twice. Let's go ahead and try this and just see what happens. Because I just want you to see how it breaks. So I'm pasting this. Okay. And it actually finds everything. See, like it found everything surprisingly. But once I say start, start the migration, it just fails absolutely everything. And so I go over to Fiddler to see what's going on. You can see the requests are still going, so you can see these reds. This is where it's failing, right? It sends a command and it didn't work. So I'm going to click on one of these and okay, well what's going on? All right, well I can see right here on these this top section. These are the request headers. So this is what I am sending to the server. And I'm telling it, you're going to create a new item. It's going to be a new resource. It's going to be the CSS file. Blah, blah. I'm just telling it all this information, but then it fails. So if I take a closer look at this, this is what kind of, I figured out what the problem was by looking at this parent folder. It's like, well, that's weird. I've never seen a migration style library folder. What's that about? And you can kind of tell what it's doing is it has attempted to, it's attempting to create this object in a folder called migration, which should then be a slash style library, and it doesn't exist. So it seems like it's trying to create the child item before the parent folder gets created. But unlike when this happens in native to native, when you've got just a very nested path, it doesn't ever create the folders here. I'm not sure if I've messed something up, but it just seems kind of like it doesn't want to work, or maybe it worked at some point, but doesn't seem to work right now. What I assume, and I didn't actually test this out, we can probably test it right now, is like if I take a look at this request, so migration dashboards, that's where I was trying to create the file. So the first thing I could do to make this get a little closer to working is probably add another slash to the end of this destination folder, migration slash. So if I were to, run this again, it'll at least be pointing at the right path instead of doing like migration and then concatenating it with something else. So it still fails. Actually, there was a little bit of green there. I'll scroll up in just a second. I want to see what that's about. I guess while it works, I'm just going to refresh this folder to see if anything made it. Yeah, I didn't think so. So I don't know what that green was. Let's see what that was about. Oh, never mind. It was just starting the migration. Okay. But if we look at Fiddler, what we should be able to see now is that now anyway, it's kind of doing the right path. It's doing migration slash style library instead of concatenating the two. But the problem is the subfolder still doesn't exist, right? So, well, what if I did, so let's take a look at what this actually looks like. So this is what it looks like in SharePoint. So this was the parent directory, right? And then we go inside bwin, and then there was, let's see, a dashboards folder, reports folder. So let's see what happens. What if I create it for it? So I wanted to really transfer reports and data connections. Those were the two I wanted to do. So let's see what happens if I go and just create those folders ahead of time. I haven't actually tested this, but I feel like it would probably work. So there's data connections, and then here's reports. So we're going to still have a ton of failures, but we should have these folders work anyway. And actually there was one more I want to do. Yeah, this documents folder, because it's got this cat JPEG and an Excel file and text, and I just want to see what happens if I try to migrate that too. So let's go back here, and we're going to do a new folder, documents. Great. So they're empty, right? And now I'm just going to run the exact same thing. Press enter. Same thing as before. It's going to list all the stuff it's going to migrate. Quite a bit of stuff. And then I'll press enter. And yeah, now we see some green. Now there is some green. So that's great. So I'm just going to go over here while it does that, just to check it out. So check the data sources, check it out. Now it's here. Again, we got to update the password. So let me just update that real quick. All right. Yeah, this thing is done. Geez, another thing I forgot to mention early on is if you choose to do migrations of just single folders, say I chose to migrate that reports folder, and I didn't want to do the data connections folder where the data source was. Well, you see at the end of the script here, it relinked the data source. So what that means is, normally you'd have to go in here, you'd have to go into manage the report, data sources, and then you'd have to actually link this yourself. So no, the script is linking it for you. It creates the data source and then it links it for you. It's amazing. But if you just migrate the report and the data source doesn't get migrated, it's not going to be able to make that link. So that's why you want to make sure that when you're migrating stuff, it's whatever folder you're migrating, it contains all the stuff, all the prerequisites, sorry, I'm forgetting the word, IAM-ESL. But if you transfer the reports and the data sources at the same time, then you don't have to worry about that. And if we run this report, it should run just fine. So let's just run that. Yeah, worked just fine. So you can see it was a lot bumpier of a ride to get here with SharePoint, but we still got it done by just doing a lot of sleuthing around with Fiddler. At the end, we kind of had to format the path a very specific way. We had to have, a slash in the front and a slash at the end. If I remove that slash at the end, I can almost guarantee that it would not work. This would not work, even if I created the folders, right? Because it's going to concatenate this folder with the target folder. So instead of saying like migration/reports, it's going to say migration reports. But anyhow, that is it. I hope this helps. I know there's some pretty limited documentation on how to transfer or do migrations. So, well, now you don't have an excuse. Good luck, and yeah, take care.